This video is about multiplying and dividing fractions. So, same time as before, I'm going to show you the steps how to multiply and divide fractions, and then we're going to see why these steps make sense. So first, pause the video and copy these steps in your notebook. Great. So let's see an example. Let's say we have 2/3 times 1/4. Now, let's follow the steps. I multiply both numerators. So this times this equals 2. And then I multiply both denominators. This times this equals 12. Very easy, right? Now we can go one step further here to simplify. So we have that 2/3 times 1/4 equals 1/6. But why? Why does this work? To understand why this works, let's understand what multiplication means. And let's go back to whole numbers to see that. Look at what we have on the screen. How many little squares do we have? 8, right? But in other words, we could also say that we have two groups of 4. One group here and one group here. When we say two groups of 4, what we are doing is actually multiplying. If I show you these squares and I ask you how many small squares do we have, you don't need to count every individual square. You just count the groups. So in this case, we have 5 groups of 4 squares. That would be 20. As you see, the word of here is very important. Of, or de in Spanish, belongs to multiplication. When we say 5 groups of 4, or in other words, 5 grupos de 4, what we're saying is 5 times 4. So I want you to make this connection between the word of, or the word de, and multiplication. And just to make sure that we are correct, let's count. There we go. 5 times 4 equals 20. Let's go back to fractions. 2/3 times 1/4. Let's try to see this in a different way. So here we have 1/4. What would be 2/3 of 1/4? So we can divide 1/4 into 3 parts, and we filled in 2 of them. So this little piece here is 2/3 of 1/4. In Spanish, we could say that this little piece here is 2/3 de un cuarto. Now I have a question for you. How many of these pieces do we need to fill in the whole unit? In order to solve it, we have to have more subdivisions. Now, if you see it now, this piece takes up 2 small rectangles. So we would need 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. So that means that this little piece here is equal to 1/6. This is another way to get to the same solution that we had before. With division, we will follow the same structure than with multiplication. Let's start by copying the steps in your notebook. So pause the video and go ahead. Now let's see how these steps work. Let's try an example. Let's say we have 1/2 divided by 1/4. The first step is convert the dividing fraction 1/4 to its reciprocal. So the reciprocal of 1/4 is 4/1. And then we simply multiply. 1 times 4 is 4, 2 times 1 is 2. The answer is 4/2. And we can simplify this to simply the number 2. But why does this work? There is a simple reason that we can visualize with the yin-yang. Multiplication and division are opposites. They are the inverse of each other. So if we say that this is multiplication, then this will be division. They are like night and day, like black and white, opposites. In other words, dividing is the same as multiplying by the inverse or the reciprocal. So let's see an example of this. Let's say we have the number 2. The inverse of this number is 1/2, because remember that every number can be written as a fraction, and to get the inverse we simply flip it. This means that 4 divided by 2 is the same as 4 times 1/2, because 1/2 is the inverse of 2 and multiplication is the inverse of division. Now, we know that 4 divided by 2 equals 2, but what is 4 over 1 times 1 over 2? Let's see. 4 times 1 is 4, 1 times 2 is 2, and we know that 4 over 2 equals 2. As you can see, they are the same. For our final example, let's try this one. 3/4 divided by 4/5. We have to find the inverse of the dividing fraction, in this case 4/5. So what would be the inverse? It would be 5/4.